Going to change the conversation a little bit, somewhat on topic there, I guess, but we're going to switch over to pesticides, regulation. From drift issues to environmental justice concerns, pesticide regulation is changing rapidly. This panel will unpack the future, what the future holds, and what it means for farmers and regulators alike. So please welcome our panelists. We have Karen Morrison, Director of the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, and Lindsey Carter, Executive Director of the California Agricultural Commissioners and Sealers Association, along with Chris Reardon, Vice President of Policy Advocacy at the California Farm Bureau, and Renee Pinel, President and CEO of Western Plant Health Association. So to kick things off here, so Karen, we were just talking with Aubrey about her recent change a couple of months ago, so you have a lot to talk about with that as well. I believe it was in February that the governor elevated you to the director role, but you have been serving at DPR for quite a few years now. I was hoping you can give us a little perspective on what it's been like for that transition and explain a little bit perhaps about your priorities going forward and kind of the vision that we should all be aware of for DPR.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the welcome, Brad. It's really a pleasure to be able to be here in this role. I'm just a little bit over 3.5 months into the position, and it's a very good time, I think, for us to be talking about the future of pesticides. There's a lot that's been, I think, very consistent themes for many years, and also a lot of new focus, direction, and energy in terms of how we think about doing that work moving forward. So really glad to be here in conversation with you all today. So I've been with the department for a little over 7 years now, and I've been able to have a front row seat to a lot of our work around strategic direction and vision for the department. And in particular, the development of our strategic plan, which was released in December of last year and really serves as a core element of focus for me in terms of my priorities for work as director of the department. I think as we think about working through that strategic plan, collaborative approaches are going to be key for how we achieve success as a part of our work, including with the agricultural industry, but many others, to really identify those opportunities to be able to move forward in productive ways. I don't have to tell this group that pest management is really important as we think about the production of a healthy, stable food supply, for protecting public health, for maintaining critical infrastructure. These are all necessary roles for when we think about pest management. And our knowledge about the impacts of pesticides continues to change and evolve as we have more information coming in, as we understand how products are being used. And so my privilege, challenge as director of the department is to think about how we hold those different pieces together, the urgent need to be able to manage pests in an effective way, while also considering and mitigating as appropriate risks that we're identifying from that pesticide use. And so my vision is really to think about how we do that work in an accountable and transparent way, how we do that collaboratively with you and many others throughout the states, that we are continuing to think about how we improve the work that we do. We're having a lot of conversations about efficiency and process optimization so that we are delivering on the commitments that we have within the department, and to do that with integrity as public servants as a part of our work. So, as I mentioned, my top priority is the strategic plan, but the strategic plan has many, many different components to that. So maybe to dive into a little bit more specific around what that looks like. I think one key component of what's in the strategic plan and aligns with my priorities is how we're thinking about the availability of alternatives, what that looks like in terms of thinking about supporting research and development into the development of new alternatives, as well as thinking about our registration processes to make sure that there are clear and predictable timelines and outcomes for our reviews to allow for new alternatives to make it to market. Another priority is thinking about how, on the flip side, as we're looking at bringing in new alternatives, considering what pesticides are already registered and what mitigation, or rather, evaluating the effectiveness and impacts of those products, and if mitigation is necessary, taking that into consideration in a public way. Also continue to think a lot about our work around enforcement in partnership with the county ag commissioners. And Lindsey, I'm sure will be able to speak more to this later on, but that's a really important component of our work to make sure that we're looking at local enforcement, taking into account those local conditions and doing that work effectively throughout the states. And then continuing to fulfill our obligations around engagement with all communities, including those most impacted by pesticide use, to be able to take that into account as a part of our work. So we have a lot of materials within the strategic plan, and one of my commitments is where we are able to report out transparently on that work. So looking at where we have clear milestones and deadlines for the department, being able to report out on that in a regular way so that folks can be able to track, are we upholding the work that we're doing, and really looking at that document as a culmination of our work over the last 3+ years and thinking about the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap, the budget agreement from last year, and the obligations and requirements and commitments that we made as a part of that work. So key priorities, continuing to work with all of you and identifying those collaborative steps forward and being in active, transparent, and engaged conversations as we move forward. So thank you so much for letting me be on the stage, join this panel, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, I appreciate that. A great way to kind of introduce you to the community here. And so there, you guys all on the stage, I should say, first and foremost, that you guys already have established relationships. This is nothing new for you guys. And one of those relationships has been something that I've really enjoyed to cover. It's this unique situation where we have local agricultural commissioners in the counties, and a situation that's evolved a lot over the years, I'm sure. And Lindsey, I'm hoping that I can kind of bounce that off of you as well and talk a little bit about the state's priorities that we just talked about a little bit, and what are your priorities going forward for commissioners?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, really where the ag commissioners lie is we pride ourselves on being the local boots on the ground enforcement of these regulations and legislative priorities from the department and then those set forth by the legislature. We cannot work independently of each other. Commissioners rely on DPR, DPR relies on commissioners, and so it has to be a strong collaborative partnership in working on pesticide use enforcement. We have a gold standard pesticide use enforcement program in the state of California. There is no other state that touches the level of pesticide use enforcement work that we do on a day in, day out basis that California does. We are proud that we have over 500 inspectors in the field every day conducting pesticide use enforcement inspections. We conduct over 30,000 inspections a year, and we pride ourselves on those numbers. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. That doesn't mean that there's areas for improvement and that there's ways that we can continue to work to enhance that program. But we are proud of the work we do, and we get recognized for that when we go back to DC and talk with US EPA in looking at our program. I think where our priorities lie, it's no secret, we've had some contentious relationships with DPR in previous administrations. And if we were probably sitting here at this time last year, this would be a completely different conversation. But from day one, we, with Karen and her administration, we have really worked to build and move forward and look forward and where that can move productively in the future. And we've done that. We are in a vastly different place today than we were at this time last year. And despite differences that we may have at the table, hard conversations, we're both committed collaboratively to working together and to moving this forward in a very sound, productive environment. Like I said earlier, we cannot exist without each other, and so we rely on each other, and so do the growers that Chris represents or the registrants that Renee represents. They rely on us to have a strong partnership together, and so we take that very seriously. And from even through all those hard times, we were working, collaboratively with the department, trying to find paths forward where we could agree, what we can work on, both with the help of Secretary Garcia and Secretary Ross. And I can confidently say that we are in a much better, completely different position today in collaborating and working with the department than we have been. And we see a lot of success moving forward in identifying and achieving the principles that Karen talked about in the strategic plan. A lot of that involves looking inward as well, and how can we hold ourselves accountable? How can we improve each county's program? How can we improve our metrics there? And really, where are there spots within our own programs that we can bolster and continue to enhance? So again, we're not perfect in the work that we do, but we're proud of that work, and we continue to improve and improve upon that and work with the department on that. So I think our biggest priority is continuing to foster that collaborative, productive working relationship with the department, identifying areas of growth that we can work on, and then achieving the principles set forth in the strategic plan as are mandated in the regulations that we enforce every day.
Okay, great. So it sounds like a lot of collaboration building going forward here and relationship building from right here. Renee, I'm going to bounce this back over to you on the the registrant side when we're talking about manufacturers, retailers, and such. How are they engaging on this? What are they looking for? What kind of opportunities are they seeing ahead? Where are you positioning yourselves?
Well, I'm going to start this by saying something that doesn't get said enough. Pesticides that are registered in California are safe. They go through the most comprehensive review federally and in the state by Karen's team, our first-class scientists. So before we move to this, we need to move to safer pesticides. Pesticides that are registered right now are safe pesticides, but we get it, our registrants. We understand that there's a large swath of Californians who either don't understand the registration process or they just don't believe it, and they believe that they are at risk. And so our registrants are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in developing new technologies, new types of pesticides. But if we want the SPM program to be successful, then they have to be registered. And from our perspective, while we support biologicals, the reality is you're not going to replace a single pesticide with a single biological. So that means you're going to have to register probably at least 4 times more products than where we're currently looking at in the registration queue right now. Additionally, there is no pesticide in the registration queue that is going to be less sustainable, less safe than a currently registered product. So for us, DPR really needs to focus on registering everything that passes their human health and environmental safety protocols and evaluation. While we understand that the state would like to see more products like biologicals, and we support more biologicals, if there are conventional products that are in the queue that can even act as bridges until we have more of those biologicals, we really think there should be a focus on getting those registers so that farmers are not ultimately left without any kind of product. I know that the department certainly is concerned about resistance to developing resistance. Well, that means we have to, again, have more products out there. So for us, we really appreciate the interaction we've had recently with the department on the collaboration, on them reaching out and us being able to comment and make contributions to the process of registering them. But for us, we support SPM, we support it being successful, and for us, the key to it being successful is getting those tools that DPR and the state wants to see out there, getting them actually registered so they're out there with farmers, so that farmers aren't left when a new pest comes in, a current pest suddenly explodes, and they don't have an array of tools available.
Do you mind if I just respond to that?
You
really
can, yeah, go
quickly,
ahead.
Which is to say, I think we completely agree that that is an area that we need to be working on and developing on. We are at a place right now where we've received additional positions. We are hiring people rapidly to be able to process our registrations more fully, to be able to meet the timeline commitments that are coming through. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get through that. But our registration timelines for last year, which is just the beginning of the new hires that we're bringing in to be able to support this, we're seeing reductions in our queues and backlogs between 15 and 40% for several of our most impacted stations, it's a good first step. There's still more work to be done, but really appreciate the approach of folks that Renee represents and others, of really identifying where we can talk about process improvements, where we can really focus our work most effectively to be able to have products registered in a timely and predictable way.
And while we're on that note as well, I mentioned about trying to get that message out more of how safe pesticides are, the regulatory system. Did you want to kind of respond to that as well?
I think that's something we agree with, that it's a really rigorous system from beginning to end. I think both Lindsey and Renee talked about this, of our initial funnel for reviewing and evaluating products for their safety, the strength of our enforcement program, and the ability to adapt and consider where new information comes available and where we can use that to have the best possible policies moving forward. I think education on the system that's in place around pesticides is really challenging work. That's something that we think about every day. We appreciate where other folks also speak about that, talk about it in other places. I think it's a continuous educational opportunity, but one that we're really proud of the work that we do within the department and supporting what's happening within the state.
Okay, thanks for that. And Chris, bumping it over to you here. You have a unique position here where you've actually worked at DPR for a while before and know the inside process there. I was wondering if you can give a little perspective on how you're working with your farmers on some of this, where some of the issues that you're pulling forward here, and your approach to particularly sustainable pest management.
Well, thank you very much for the invite today. Look, I think first thing I just mentioned to Karen as we were sitting here talking, I talked to her previous two predecessors, and I said, there's two really important things that you need to do, okay, at least from my perspective, and as it relates to the department. Number one, defend your authority, okay? Defend your program, okay? And what I mean by that is don't ignore, don't sort of, how should I say nicely, we have a lot to be proud of in California. We have the most comprehensive regulatory system in the world, okay? Defend that, okay? Be proud of it, okay? There's been a lot of investment over the last close to 30 years, 32 years, 33 years of what we do in California on the pesticide regulatory program, because sometimes it's mischaracterized, not only in Sacramento and other parts of the state. So defend your program. Number two is, it's really important to carry out and have a relationship with your county ag commissioners, okay? They carry out they are your eyes and ears at the local level. They're enormously important to what you do. And as a longtime commissioner told me a long time ago, is that you can't do this without us. And he was right. So this relationship between the commissioners, the department, and the growers that I represent is enormously important. We think it's important also, and Karen and I were talking about this previously too. I know she's out visiting Farm Bureau members. I think even today you were supposed to be in San Diego, I understand, or we're talking about being in San Diego with our Farm Bureau. We want to encourage you. I know you're going to plan that to come back again, but really encourage you to sit down and talk to farmers and ranchers all over the state. And with the commissioners as well, and I sort of encourage her to bring the commissioner community with her as well, is because I think you can't sort of ignore that sort of this program is sort of essentially a working relationship. And the commissioners, from my point of view, and by the way, I didn't always agree with them either. During my tenure, it's almost like a family. As you know, sometimes there's disagreements, not families that don't always agree. But the bottom line is that you have to work together for the good of the program and the good of the citizens of the state who expect us to maintain the program that we currently have today. So these relationships are really important. I'm very pleased too. Karen's been with the program a while, understands the department. We look forward to working with her in the future, and we will do everything we can to sort of ensure that tools that our members need, okay, can be used safely, effectively, but also we can get them into the marketplace in a much more efficient manner.
Great, we've covered a lot of topics there already. One of the things that's been on my mind is we wrote up about it a lot for a couple of years. There was a lot of back and forth over increasing the mill assessment, and that finally went up last year. And at the same time, so we're increasing that revenue for DPR for programs, but then we have this big state budget crisis with cuts across the agencies and a lot of stuff even at the moment, up in the air still, as the legislature is still trying to sort that out. Karen, I know you want to talk about that, but I want to see if I can get Lindsey in here first. Do you have any thoughts on that area?
Maybe I can say stuff that Karen can't. It's super frustrating. It is a super frustrating position to be in. All the work that went through to get 2113, passed last year, all the, discussions back and forth on what was needed and how to make that happen and where to prioritize positions and where to prioritize funding. And so we get that across the finish line, we get this big game plan, and yes, we're finally going to be able to bolster, 2 areas very important to commissioners, enforcement and registrations, and then we get handcuffed with budget cuts and an 8% budget cut, and you get told, well, yes, it's special funding, but you can't spend it, and we're going to hold it, and you're in a freeze position, and it's kind of this push and pull. And so it kind of negates, all the work that we all did last year in working to try to get that, and to get that fair mill increase that everybody could buy into and understand. And granted, there were still those unhappy on different parts of that. And now to actually see that come to fruition and not be able to happen is extremely frustrating. And then when you come not only with the 8% budget cuts, but you come with hiring freezes and vacancy sweeps, and where are the first places that gets happened? Registration and enforcement. And so it's really frustrating when you work so hard to try to get something across the finish line to make a positive difference, and then there's powers that be that is out of Karen's control, out of the department's control, and they're forced to comply with what every agency is complying with right now. So to say that's frustrating would be an understatement. I think it delays progress on all of the initiatives that we are trying to work on. As fast as the department is trying to fill the positions that were authorized within the mill increase, they're also having to hold back and not do that, and prioritize and push and pull. So we don't see points achieved, and we don't see making the strides that we want to see in some of those areas, and that further delays the whole process. And it's a double-edged sword. When you talk about the mill, that's a huge thing to get growers in the ag community on board to make that happen. And when they don't see the positive change reflected on that, and these are things outside the department's control, to have that conversation again anytime in the near future is going to be even more difficult. And how do you do that? And how do you prioritize that when you are you can't even fulfill what they were trying to do originally. So we're frustrated. We'd like to see that freed up. We'd like to see all those positions be able to be filled, priorities being placed in enforcement and registration. And I'm not sure we're going to get this year. I don't know what next budget year looks like either. But it's definitely something I know that we see the department trying and then being held back. And we're trying to make those conversations at the Capitol and really bring that to light. But it's definitely something that the department is wrestling with, and that we're feeling the ripple of negative effects on in being able to support that and to see that put into practice.
So I think the couple of pieces I'll say on this topic. So I think one, we take the commitments that we made as part of last year's budget really seriously within the department. And I think we're still, the budget's still going through the process. There's some, it's going through the process. And so we will see what ultimately gets signed and what that looks like moving forward. But we are committed to doing everything that we can with the resources we have to fulfill the obligations and commitments that we made as a part of last year. Which means hiring all the places that we can, doing extensive recruitments. We're getting a lot of really great new staff on board, which I'm really thrilled to be able to see, and trying to figure out ways to minimize impacts of whatever cuts we may need to take as a part of this. So it's something that we're trying to think about those efficiencies as best as we can, and we're, I think, mindful of how all those pieces come together.
Great. And Renee, on the you're more on the process side. You see that with not just outdated systems, a lot of paperwork, and now you're probably seeing some aspect of those budget issues as well. Are you able to speak to any of that, or are there any opportunities for improvement too?
Well, I'll say that DPR did successfully implement their CalPest program. So that has been a help. That's taken a lot of the paperwork and paper burden, I think, out of the registration process. I'll also give DPR marks for the fact that, as Karen said, they have stayed focused on their commitment in 2113 of hiring registration specialists, and we recognize that they're now having them to get them up to speed. So I think there are positive signals. We just are always concerned about, as you go down the road, that other pressures, particularly in California, political pressures start coming in, and that, we just continue to want to collaborate with DPR wherever we can to make sure that the commitments that were made in 2113 and the efforts that are underway right now continue down that road so that we do see positive outcomes in a few months of more products being registered, more variety of types of products being registered, and just being able for DPR to articulate what they're doing in a way that the communities that are concerned. I don't know that you'll ever alleviate those concerns, but at least be able to have a story or a message that is translatable to them in a common language.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, the one area that, as we were engaged in the mill, as you might imagine as well, one area that frustrated me then and frustrated me now is there's really no additional resources for pest prevention. And so I would, look, my members are the ones that pay for this, purchase these products and pay for the mill, right? So I would much, at least from our perspective, there should have been significant investment in pest prevention in the state. As we saw last year, Secretary Ross mentioned some of the challenges we saw down in San Bernardino County, Riverside County last year with pests. And so that was our frustration this year, is to pest prevention maybe offset some of the costs as it relates to the mill, right? And you don't need as much money either because we don't have as many pests. So look, I think there needs to be a concerted effort, okay? Not only this remaining administration, but as we look forward, so let's fund pest prevention in California the way it needs to be funded. So that was our frustration in this discussion. We didn't talk about it. We talked about it sort of when we were meeting with members' offices and those discussions. But I think we need to have this discussion, make sure that CDFA has the resources they need to really combat pest prevention. Because look, this isn't going to get any easier. I'd argue it's going to get harder in the world we live in. So,
Brad, can I add on to that? Really, when you look at the SPM roadmap, the number one way to achieve any of the ideals listed in the SPM roadmap is to invest in pest prevention. It was one of the tenets in there that was not a controversial tenet. It was one that was agreed upon from all stakeholders participating in the SPM working group, is if you invest in pest prevention and you have a leading pest prevention program in the state, we can prevent pests before they even get here to impacting agriculture. That not only helps our environmental stakeholders in showing actual reduction of applications, but it also helps, the growers that Chris represents and their bottom line in not having to, apply and do additional applications. So that is the number one way to achieve pest prevention. That's not all on DPR to achieve. That's on our partners over at CDFA, and I wish Secretary Ross was still here. It's something we talk about, every time we see each other. CACASA and the Department of Food and Ag are working collectively with the UC and CSU system to introduce a comprehensive pest prevention program analysis project, which should be coming out later this summer, that will show where the different pathways are and how we can, adequately address those pathways and what that funding is going to be needed for those pathways. That's a collective ask of the legislature to be able to fund pest prevention and not rely on federal dollars to do that. DPR can help and support those efforts. It'll help achieve SPM, or at least some of the ideals in SPM, but that is the number one way that we can actually look at reducing applications in California and really helping the bottom line of growers and looking at environmental safety. And so I can't echo that enough. Anywhere we can get support or this general idea that pest prevention is the key and the number one way to solve these is something that we'll be pushing until we get a state pest prevention plan in place that really prioritizes those efforts across all agencies.
Karen, feel free to jump in if you'd like to at any time too.
No, I think just to echo that we talk about this also, that prevention is the single best way to manage keeping pests out of the state, out of the field, out of the home, right? It doesn't matter what location you're talking about, that is sort of the first and best way to manage pests, is just to not have them in the first place. And that there will still also be pests. And so how we consider all of those different pieces working together as a part of the work that we do.
Okay, great. And we kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but the environmental justice aspect of it, it is a tough job that you're coming into here. We've seen that through a few directors recently, but there's more pressure, it seems like, for the environmental justice side. It's becoming more vocal. We're seeing just kind of a more of a transition now. And can you just describe a little bit how you're balancing that, how your approach is to these two difficult interest groups here?
I mean, I think that at its core, folks are really passionate in this space. And I find that that's true across the board, is that this is, someone's business, their family business that's been in place for a really long time, or it's someone's community and they're concerned about, the health impacts of their mother or their cousin or their child, that it's all, very dear topics to folks. And so I think for me, things that I really want to bring to the space is, one, kind of listening and hearing from people about what your stories are, sharing the work that we do, and then thinking about where there are opportunities to build bridges to be able to move within that. I think that there are, if we look at regulation of pesticides today versus 10 years ago versus 20 years ago, the level of additional scientific rigor and consideration that goes into the process is so much more expanded. Again, I'm so proud of the work that my team is doing, and I think, Renee's point around where there are, continuing to be safer products that are being brought to market is absolutely true. And there are certainly elements of distrust for folks who live in areas that are most impacted by pesticide use, of not feeling heard historically, currently, depending on the particular situations. And so a lot of our work is where we are, inviting space to have conversations, to try to understand those perspectives, see if there are places that kind of fit into the broader set of work that we do, and identify paths forward for that. I think fundamentally we believe really strongly in the scientific programs that we have, and anecdotal information is helpful in trying to inform and think about those pathways moving forward. So there are pieces that the department will be putting in place in the next year or so to be able to have those opportunities for folks to raise concerns, but also engage with the department in different ways. So we'll be establishing an environmental justice advisory committee by the end of this year to be able to, consistent with state law, to be able to have kind of clear opportunities for folks to be able to raise concerns about what's happening within their communities, and give us an opportunity to talk about what's in place. Are there elements that we could always do better at, and kind of think about where that comes together? And then also thinking about, for us, establishing our pesticide prioritization process, to have a clear, scientifically driven committee to talk about pesticide risks and help to inform and recommend priorities for the department to work on as we consider risks, alternatives, and mitigation.
Okay, and I should clarify, I didn't mean difficult interest groups, but difficult space to be in. Anyway, so let's transition over. We got some nice questions coming up here. One, we're only talking about one half of the equation here with regulatory agencies, but we also have a very active legislature. I've been covering more than 2,000 bills every year, I know it. So one of these questions here gets to how is the department, but let's kind of expand to everybody here, working with legislatures to avoid more cancellations of some of these products, and rather than taking more of the science-based approach that we're talking about here.
Yeah, so I'll start, and I'm sure others will want to chime in on this topic, is that we believe really strongly in the programs that we have, and the process of being able to kind of gather information, use that to inform our decisions. We think the governor had very clear direction as a part of his signing messages and veto messages for bills last year around the department being the first and foremost place to be able to do pesticide regulation, to be able to take into account the different nuances of pest need, of risks, and that is the appropriate space to do it, particularly as funded coming out of AB 2113 and the budget bill from last year. So I think for me, that means us fulfilling our commitments to that work, to be able to do that in a transparent, engaged way, to be able to reflect and share that information back with legislators when they ask the question, well, what's happening at DPR? Well, here's all the things that we're doing. And that's how we're really looking to move forward in this space.
Chris, yeah, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I would just say this, and I heard a lot of this last year during the 2113 discussions, but and Karen's right. We need look, I think when members are running, and by the way, they have every right to do so, but when legislative members are running cancellation active ingredient by active ingredient, that's a huge problem. That is a huge problem. We have a department that's been in place now since 1990, and by the way, before that, at the Department of Food and Agriculture previously, but we have to let the process work. We have world-class scientists at the department. We have a process in place. So sort of just bypass that based on a particular situation that a member finds himself in or a particular concern. My first question always was the member's offices, have you talked to the department yet? Well, we're going to. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem. So, but it's also incumbent on the department as well to make perfectly clear what their authorities are, what our process is, please engage with us, all those sort of questions, because what I kept hearing during 2113 last year is they were mischaracterizing the department's program, right? And so we were very clear in terms of where the department was and what the responsibilities are. But as I mentioned when I first kicked this off, it's easy for folks, particularly in Sacramento, to mischaracterize what the department does. It really, really is easy. And so legislating priorities, cancellation priorities to legislature is a huge problem.
Renee, you want to step in on that?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I think for us, probably one of the biggest positive for SPM is that there is actually now a clearly articulated system that we can use with the legislature, or DPR can explain to the legislature as far as what takes place and what their program is moving forward, and that the fact that it is pretty clearly stated. So I think that is a positive. Also the fact that SPM was agreed upon by a wide cross-section of interests, including the environmental justice community. And so, I mean, that is one of the things that we will certainly point out, that their DPR has a program that was supported and endorsed by interest groups that are concerned about pesticides, and therefore these legislative efforts are not necessary. They need to focus on DPR, supporting DPR carrying out their mission, as opposed to trying to play scientists in introducing their own bills.
Lindsey, you want to jump in?
I echo what the panel has said. In our advocacy efforts, we say DPR has a robust process. It needs to be trusted at DPR. When we start cherry picking things in the legislature, it gets up for interpretation that, we have a process for a reason and it needs to stick to that process. So I definitely agree with everybody up here. Like Chris said, they have every right to do so, but we have a process for a reason. It's a successful process. It needs to go through that with all the priorities that the department, weighs on. And if we need to engage and we need to, provide more information and we need to provide more education, we can all do that. We're all willing to do that. But sometimes bills aren't always the answer in circumventing the system.
Great, and we have just a few minutes to wrap up here. Hopefully one more question if everybody's a little quick. So I like the top one here. What is your big ask of the agriculture industry? What do you feel that you need us to help SBM be successful?
Been mulling this over because I think that my big ask is to work with us. I think that in the engagement that I've had with the agricultural industry, during my time at DPR, prior to my time at DPR, I am really mindful that the inherent business of agriculture is filled with risks that you can't control. That the weather is looking different, the particular markets may change, there are other policies that may be at play, and that there's a lot of complexity that comes with that, and pesticides is just one component of the many other considerations that are considered every day by our growers within the state. And that my ask of work with us, I think we do our best work when it is well informed by what practices look like on the ground, what the realities of that are. I've been talking about this a lot as a part of our prioritization process stand-up of wanting to understand better what does it mean to have a viable alternative to manage a pest. I tell folks I can go to my database of registered pesticides and can tell you all of the registered pesticides that are in place. I can't tell you whether or not those are effective if it was rainy for the previous 3 days, or how that aligns with other products that you've used, or what the resistance patterns are, or the 100 other considerations that go into the selection of a specific product. And that expertise on the ground is critical to be able to have well-informed policies for the work that we're doing. So the ask of talk to us, work with us, we really welcome ag being present as a part of our work to be able to support that. I think I also talk with a lot of growers who want to be sustainable, who want to do the best work that they can, who are not interested in harming human health, harming the environment. I see so many places of strong overlap in the overall goals that we have, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to be able to do that in concert.
Chris, I'm going to bump that to you next.
How would I answer that? Look, we encourage, and matter of fact, and Karen knows this too, I think it's really important. It's hard to regulate from your desk. So we think it's important that we encourage and we will help the department any way they can. We want to be part of, hopefully, the folks that collaborate, work with the department. As you know, 400 different commodities. There's lots of different ways we do things out there. We apply material when, where, how, and we sure would like to and have a real conversation with real farmers, real ranchers about the use of these materials and how important it is. As Karen said, there's a lot of challenges, but how do we actually use these materials in ways that remember our members who apply these materials, their families live out there too. They go to those schools out there. They live in those communities, okay? So we care about those just as much as anybody else, and we want to make sure that that we're working with all our regulatory agencies, but we would really encourage, along with the commissioner community, our local partners, that those discussions continue, and we can really actually sit down and talk through some of the complexities that we find ourselves in, because as you know, we have a large urban environment surrounded by rural communities, suburban areas where we still grow in ag, and how's this going to work and what's this going to look like, all the sort of challenges that we face that we really need to sit down with DPR and walk through.
Lindsey, your members are on the ground there actually working with farmers.
Yeah. I really, to kind of echo, Karen and Chris's comments, I think it is important to have those hard conversations. We may not agree on everything. We may not see eye to eye on everything, but that shouldn't detour us from having those hard conversations and really, sitting together at the table and trying to find a path forward. Karen and her team have not turned down a tour that we have set up to try to get, out there to see it. I echo Chris's comments that sometimes you just have to see it and you have to get outside the desk and see what it looks like in practice and understanding that. And so the department, I encourage the industry to offer those opportunities to the department, both to the commissioner side as well as the department side as well. I think it's important to have commissioner staff on these tours, interacting with the growers, seeing what that looks like, because it's really a full circle part of the process. So I think the tours are great. I think getting out and conversing with farmers so that they can tell their story, they can share their concerns, their problems, that helps illustrate that. And then you go back and you have that, in in your head and you understand what's going on. They do that with legislators a lot. It's the same to do that with our regulatory and agency folks as well. And commissioners are the same. We have inspectors that are in the field every day. We want to showcase what that work looks like. We want to showcase, what those inspections, what those investigations look like. And so we're consistently working with the department, either through our enforcement branch liaisons in our regional offices, or of the department executive staff, of getting them out there and looking at the issues so that we can kind of put a face to things and we can understand, so that when we are sitting around a conference room table talking about things, there's a picture that goes in. It's not just trying to understand words or not trying to convey what that actual problem is. You can see it and you have that visual in mind as well. So I think that's a key element. I think anybody in the agriculture space, grower community, the more that they can invite people in, the more they can open that up and tell their story to showcase that, I think the better for everybody at hand.
Renee, you have 30 seconds.
All right, I'll make this short. It's going to be a different message. It's going to be about environmental justice. The biggest mistake we make is to dismiss the feelings of the environmental justice community. We have to stop simply negating it by saying they don't know what they're talking about. We have to understand it's based on emotion, it's based on life experience, and so whether you agree with it or not, agriculture needs to start recognizing it. And how we do that, and I think possibly helping to alleviate, at least from a registrant's perspective, is we need to start talking to them in a different way. As Karen said, registering pesticides is a tough conversation to have because it's very technical and scientific. So that's probably not the best way to go. But all of us are capable of communicating how either having more food, having safe homes is beneficial to these communities in a way that they can recognize and understand without just promoting a product, promoting yield, promoting profit. We have to start talking to these communities in a language that augments their security feelings as opposed to simply trying to argue with them that they're not at risk.
Okay, and with that, that'll wrap up our panel discussion. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists here.